Now it's time for our first edition of Ask Phillip. That's me. And we've narrowed it down to 3 questions. So let's get right to it. This first question is from TK on Twitter. TK is looking for advice on refinancing student loans. Any tips and resources would be appreciated. Also, how do you think the pandemic will affect loan rates going forward? Now, in terms of refinancing student loans, I have to make an honest admission and confession. I was so privileged. I was born in Denmark, so all my education was free. So I find it to be absolutely atrocious that, it's a little foreign to me that someone would have to be burdened with that. That said, there are many ways you can create equity. One of the ways I spoke about last week also is real estate investing. You can create equity, you can refinance there, and you can pay that off. You can also pay off credit cards if you have some of those. The most important thing is just going back to the basics: budgeting, managing your spending, being committed to building wealth over time, saying, I want to save this every month, I want to save this every year, I want to invest in this much. And you start to have that wealth building mindset, you will find that just by extension and proxy, those liabilities will seem to dissipate. It's a little weird to explain. But now, to your second part of your question, how will pandemic affect loan rates going forward? They already have affected loan rates, because if you see the Fed lowered the interest rates, they're almost at European rates. In Europe, they're at 0 or negative interest rates. It's that here too. It's not quite the same conditions, but debt is cheaper. If you look to buy a property, the interest rates that you're getting right now are much sweeter than they were a year ago. And they're just trying to get some money into the economy and get things going. So that's really what it is. Now, this next question comes from Sabrina Harley on Twitter. Should I be investing in Bitcoin or normal stocks? Now, the way this is phrased, again, I said this before, I want to say it again. I am not a financial advisor, so I'm not at liberty to tell you what to do with your money. That said, I can only tell you what it is that I would do. The thing about Bitcoin is that, okay, it sounds hot, sounds cool. And it's almost like cannabis. It's one of those things where there's potential. I, as a prudent investor, I don't like to invest in spec. I don't like to invest in ideas. I like to invest in systems. System meaning, is there a pattern that can be predicted? Then I'm making a sound decision. If I'm just guessing on something that's potential, then I'm skating on thin ice here. The thing with Bitcoin is that, number one, it's so volatile. That's number one. 2, is Bitcoin actually being used anywhere? And if so, what are we really doing? Number 3, if Bitcoin, from what I see, the argument for Bitcoin is that it's the future of money. Well, if it really was the future of money, by the time it becomes the present of money, who's going to adopt it first? The big banks. If the big banks haven't yet, I don't know. And some say, yes, they have blockchain, this and that. Okay, fine. But I'm still spending dollars. Okay? So that's just what I would say. I just say stick to the systems, not the ideas. I'm not saying you shouldn't put a little bit of your portfolio in Bitcoin if you like to roll that dice, but just stay smart. Common sense. That would be my 2 cents. And that 2 cents could turn into $2 if you just use it correctly. Now, our last question comes from Raven Olson on Instagram. Phillip, if I take out a loan to buy our property, I'm nervous about being under that much debt for a long time. Any thoughts? Many thoughts. Number 1 being debt. I say this on my Instagram also. Debt is like fire. Now, fire can heat your house. It can heat your food. It can keep you safe. But if you let the flames engulf you, it can burn everything to the ground. That, to me, falls in the category of consumer debt. If you have a lot of high-interest debt from credit cards, for instance, you're in big trouble because let's say you're buying something for $100, but you're paying 25%. That's predatory interest rates on what you just bought there. Are you really, come on. Did it ever occur to you why these banks are willing to give you points that can make you, and give you money? Because they make way more money on the interest rates that they charge you. So that's number 1. 2, any billionaire you see, if there's one that exists, I don't know who it is. But any billionaire you see has probably more than 50% of their fortune in debt. And I'm probably being conservative here. Simply because the way to generate a $1 billion fortune is what I call the billionaire blueprint, which is using debt intelligently as leverage. For instance, when you buy a house, right? Let's say it's $100,000. You put down $20,000, the bank gives you 80%, which is $80,000, right? You do things, you fix it up and whatnot. Now the value goes to just throwing out numbers, let's use 200,000. You only have an $80,000 loan, but your net worth, the $120,000 that's left is equity that goes right to your net worth. Without that initial $80,000 from the bank, you would have never got the property in the first place. You see what I mean? Any of the big funds, if they raise $1 billion, they leverage that $1 billion using debt. So that $1 billion now becomes $5 to $10 billion in purchasing power because the bank will finance the rest because they say, look, these boys got this cash. Let's bring this to the equation. Remember, banks aren't there to do you any favors. They're just there to make sure they can make money on their money, and their business model is interest rates. So the banks actually can be a really good partner for you if you just know how to use debt. So that's what I would say. Don't be too worried about long-term debt because it just means that you have the flexibility and predictability to use that financing intelligently to generate more wealth for yourself. Oh my God, I hope that makes sense. All right. If you want to hear your question live, make sure to follow us on social media. Ask us a question on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @BoldTV, and we will feature you on next week's show. That'll be fun.